Okay, well, good afternoon. I almost said good morning, showing how behind I am. I do like this schedule so much better. I'm hopeful that the public likes it better because it does give us a mental break. It gives us time to eat food and refresh ourselves. I'm hoping the public appreciates that as much. Now, do we have Karen Bowerman and Michelle Belcott on? Because I can't see them. Okay, so right now it's just the three of us. I would like to proceed, though. Hearing no objection, we have a quorum. Okay, so we'll have public comment on agenda items only, please. Do we have anyone in the room? Okay.
Oh, yeah, you can come on up if you like and state your name.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's good to see you all, and I trust see those who are with us virtually. My name for the record is Vicki Kraft, and I'm here today as a citizen of Vancouver, Washington, and also as a former state representative for Washington State for the 17th Legislative District, which was primarily at that time in Clark County, Washington. I appreciate the chance to address the council today. I understand on your agenda, you are going to be discussing the specific board assignments for committees. So that is really what this will refer to. And as I get started here, the committee should be probably pretty obvious. But I wanted to share with the council some concerns. I live up in Salmon Creek area. And granted, I live somewhat near I-5. Certainly, Pearson Air Force is close by. We all know PDX is nearby, and the International Air Guard, obviously near PDX. But the last 3 nights, starting Sunday, January 7th, and basically at 10:30 p.m. at night to about 11:30 p.m. at least, and then in the mornings, 5:30 a.m. to about 6:30 a.m., I've heard the sound of constant jets. They sound somewhat like fighter jets, like Top Gun, somewhat like the rumbling of, I'll say, bomber jets, old bomber jets. And that's a kind of an odd time, and I've lived in this home for over, almost 15 years. So this sounds a little bit new to me, and that's why I'm here today. As a former state representative, I literally had one constituent tell me during the pandemic that their relatives in Canada had a report that they had seen of North Korea military operations in West Canada. I looked into it and also talked with a congressional member connected with one who told me they had been told South Korea. So the bottom line is, as I'm listening to sounds of planes, if they're training maneuvers, great. I would hope so, that they, training is good. But if by chance there's a foreign military in our midst planning or paving the way for any type of, target in our area, obviously we have a lot of leaders in our area that are very open to communism versus freedom, and that does concern me, and I am speaking from my legislative experience there. Councilor Medvedji, Chair Medvedji, obviously with your background in veteran service, thank you for that, and your committee assignments being on emergency services and also the reserve. I would like to ask you specifically, and I know I have known you longer, if you could look into what that might be. It could be anything from Pearson Air Force Base, but those times and the consistency is very odd to me. And at this point, you obviously have a much better connection than I do. So I would just ask for your help for that. Clearly, we want to protect our people, I'm sure.
So I will explore that. You are out of time, though, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thanks for your time today and your consideration.
Is there anyone else in person who would like to comment? Please come. You'll want to hit the button there.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Cox. I'm here representing the Coalition for Sustainable Land Management. I appear here today in favor of putting on hold any processes or expenditures related to the FRDU or other railroad activity until the county terminates the lease with Portland Vancouver Junction Railroad, PVJR. The business decision to move forward spending hard-earned taxpayer money to improve a railroad without assurance of a viable operator makes no sense. For months now, PVJR has proven time and time again that it is unwilling to follow even the simplest steps to comply with local, county, and state law. The citizens are tired of excuses, the arrogance of certain members of the council, and those proponents wishing to ignore the fact this is a bad fit for Clark County. The record is ripe with examples of an arrogant, condescending attitude towards county staff, citizens in general, and multiple violations of state federal law, as well as non-compliant attitude toward PVJR operations and lease compliance. Examples of these are unauthorized grading and fill of wetlands, streams in Curtin Creek and Chalachly, multiple instances of non-compliance of the lease, as well as non-compliant interpretation of the lease itself. Additionally, the railroad operator has shown his contempt for the citizens of Clark County by accusing community members that brought issues to light of destroying habitat and killing fish within these areas, when it was in fact the railroad operator himself who is responsible for those noncompliance with state and federal regulations. Even when state and federal agencies recommended discontinuing construction in Curtin Creek and Chalachly, it wasn't until a cease and desist order was that the construction came to a halt. At the point most of the damage was done, all while the operator has stated multiple times he is in compliance with state and federal regulations and refuses to accept any responsibility for his actions, let alone conducting meaningful mitigation in those areas. Yet state and federal experts have proven without a shadow of a doubt otherwise. Clark County needs to quit pandering to the whims of the railroad operator, reconsider its relationship with him, at the same time cease any further expenditures on FRDU until any issues are resolved to the satisfaction of the citizens of Clark County. The county needs to carefully evaluate whether FRDU and the lease agreement with PVJR are in the best interest of Clark County, the community as a whole, and not a windfall to one entity. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room? Please come up.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Hardy. I'm here to address RFP number 877. That's the funding of $100,000 for a consultant. The purpose of this RFP is to invite the consultant community to suggest various approaches to help Clark County implement development regulations to allow freight rail dependent use along the county short line. In going back and reviewing the annual budget on page 11, it does say 2024 county manager considerations, and it says the following considerations were taken: maintaining and looking at what we're using and spending our monies for, maintaining existing service levels. All these things should be taken in consideration in making your decision. Continued pressure on many of the county major funds, understanding impacts from increased demands for services, new mandates, rising costs for aging technology, infrastructure replacement, major maintenance, and goods and services, feasible options, maintaining appropriate reserves, minimizing impacts to services and residents, and addressing critical needs and liabilities. You have continued to listen to, as you have all this morning, the concerns around the railroad, lack of financial viability, quality of life and the impact of that, the impact on public safety, the public sentiment that is now being expressed with more and more groups coming forward, PVJR and the railroad conduct. So with the consideration of this, using our general fund money seems inappropriate, and we would like a pause put on that until some things can be clarified, and it seems more fiscally conservative to spend this money. The railroad consultant position is likely unnecessary and comes from an already overburdened general fund that had to deny over 100 requests. So I'm a constituent of District 3. I'm hoping that my counselor comes forward and shows physical conservativeness and looking at the criteria that you use in evaluating what monies to spend out of our general funds. Thank you. We ask for a pause.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room? In Chair, at the moment, I have 5 callers online. Linda Mitchell, please go ahead.
Michiel. My name
Yes,
is
go
Linda
ahead.
Michiel, and I'm speaking today about the intentions to hire a $100,000 consultant paid for with our tax dollars to implement the FRDU amendment to the Growth Management Act. Given that the current manager of the PVJR is embroiled in complaints and restraints from numerous federal agencies for his actions or lack thereof when speaking of getting permits for the work he is bulldozing through, literally, and given that people in the neighborhoods within half a mile or a mile, depending on who gets to decide, on either side of the railroad tracks oppose a railroad overlay, I question the need for such a consultant. Instead of hiring a consultant and continuing down the path to an invasive railroad overlay, terminate the PVJR lease. Rather than insisting on heavy industry along the railroad line, promote its existing light industrial and agricultural uses. Add a path for biking, walking, etc., as was started years ago. Do something positive for the citizens of Clark County who live in the area involved, rather than impairing their quality of life by allowing large numbers of very heavy rail cars to travel through neighborhoods and near our schools, causing noise, seismic effects, and fear of accidents and derailments. Listen to the over 80% of the people who rejected this when asked a few years ago in September 2018. Listen to us who reject it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirk, please go ahead.
Those are definitions and wildfire. Definitions are critical to understanding what is being communicated. Today, you'll be shown an impressive slide that says virtually all of the cleanup areas are 100% complete. Under most people's understanding of the word complete, that is an impressive thing. The problem is, what is meant by 100% complete? Great question. I've followed Camp Bonneville since its closure in '95, attending virtually every meeting regarding it. And from what I know from those meetings and the paperwork surrounding the cleanup work, complete does not mean safe, nor does it mean cleaned up. 2 examples. The Department of Ecology held a hearing in 2019 to reduce the Western Slopes UXO cleanup area from 425 acres down to 195 acres. Remember that the entire 425 acres was considered strewn with UXO up till that point. They wanted to reduce the cost, so they changed the standard of requiring cleanup below 14 degrees down below 14%, justifying it with anything above that will keep people from walking on it. First off, it's a very small difference between 14 degrees and 14%, yet look at how much property is covered. So it isn't very much steeper than 14%. Next, I have 10 boys. The first thing they do when they get out of the wilderness park is head to the steepest hill to see who can climb it the fastest. So to say that is 100% complete and safe is a huge misnomer. Second is the approximately 6 acres of wetlands that had a high probability of UXO, but due to being wetlands, it was decided not to search it, but substitute 6 acres somewhere else. Wait, so you can take an area of high probability of UXO and transfer that inspection to 6 areas of property that wasn't high probability of UXO and look there for it? That doesn't make sense. Oh, and they can't tell you where the 6 acres are currently today. Lastly is the wildfire issue, probably the greatest concern of the neighbors. You all know that Larch Correction Center was a key part of firefighting in our area. Thank you for supporting my resolution last summer regarding keeping it open. Anyway, one of the main reasons that the state said that they needed to close it was because it was too close to wildfires, as seen with the Nakia fire. So I have to ask you, if your firefighters have to leave the area permanently due to the risk of wildfires to them in their own area, what does that do for protecting you from wildfire when they're gone? And second, shouldn't we be just as concerned about wildfire when it relates to Camp Bonneville, a property that has extreme firefighting limitations? Again, these are only a few of the concerns that seem to be overlooked. There's a great need for assessment of the current situation with Camp Bonneville and then communicating that clearly to the community, which has no real clue about the situation. That was my hope for the Camp Bonneville Advisory Committee, and I hope they can pursue that further. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Kirk, could you please repeat your last name? We didn't quite catch that.
Van Gelder, V-A-N-G-E-L-D-E-R.
Perfect. Thank you. Wendy, please go ahead.
Of a delay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Wendy Cleveland with the Sierra Club. I live in District 2. I want to ask my district counselor to vote on the FRDU consultant with fiscal responsibility. I'm asking that you vote to pause the allocation of $100,000 for the RFP rail consultant position until you are sure about the situation with the railroad operator. And additionally, I'd like to ask if the county manager has any new reports on where the county currently stands with our contract with PBJR. I would ask for as much transparency as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica Zazueta.
Everyone as well. My name is Monica Zazueta, Z as in zebra, A as in apple, Z as in zebra, U as in unicorn, E as in elephant, T as in tiger, A as in apple. And I am a concerned mom, and I do not agree with the FRDU heavy industrial railroad plan, and it is clear neither do the people of Clark County. I therefore do not support the council approving spending $100,000 for the FRDU consulting contract, especially given the uncertainty of the situation with the rail operator. Thank you, Councilors Young and Marshall, for raising this issue and supporting fiscal responsibility. I urge the other councilors to take a step in the direction of regaining public trust in your leadership and listening to what the public overwhelmingly wants, not to destroy the precious ecosystems that are left here in Clark County that provide us clean water, natural beauty, locally grown food, and the carbon sinks we need for a stable climate, which the heavy industrial railroad plan will do. Spending all this money and barreling ahead with FRDU planning despite public outcry is wrong, and these taxpayer dollars could be spent better elsewhere given all the issues we are facing. Thank you so very much for your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you. Jackie Lane.
Nice to talk to you again. Regarding the contract to work on the FRDU uses, it seems that public input on this has been ignored by the council. You've had massive public input in 2018, and you have growing public input today. The 2018, that was your own survey. And and that was before we knew anything about that operator. In spite of the outrageous behavior of the operator, his desires still have more weight with some of you than the people who voted you into office. I've seen his correspondence with one of you about rezoning for heavy industrial along the entire 33-mile length of the line, disregarding the people, schools, and farms that are already there. I have seen the correspondence from the operator prior to the decision to ignore prior direction to staff and pick option 6, again, favoring his input over that of the community. With all that is going on, this should be put on hold. Council should look at the actual public input A pretty thorough survey was once done by the county. Council should look at the letters and testimony received over the last year from the public. Before contracting this out, a serious rethink about the FRDU and what the county should do with that space is needed. This time, respecting the public's needs and wants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Jim Byrne? Jim, can you hear us okay? I do see you unmuted. We don't have any callers after this, though. Okay,
So, not seeing anyone else?
correct. Nobody else.
All right, so last call in the room. Anyone else that we didn't hear from that intended to speak during public comment? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on to old business, the minutes from January 3rd, 2024.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any corrections, comments, further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Karen Bowerman, I'm not sure I heard you. I saw it looked like you were trying to respond, but I didn't hear.
I'm here and I said I approve.
Okay, so motion carries. Thank you. Do we have Michelle Belkat on yet? Okay, she is on. Good. All right, Camp Bonneville Advisory Group.
And Chair Mevaji, before we move forward, if I can I ask council to amend the agenda for today?
I'm sorry, you would like to amend the agenda?
Yes, please.
What did you want to add?
Actually, I would request council to remove section 7.1, one of the executive sessions, the 42301101G.
So just to make sure I heard that correctly, you want to remove RCW 42-30-1101G. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any objection to removing a 10-minute discussion from executive session? All right, so we'll go ahead and amend it by crossing that out, 7.1. Anything else? Kathleen, any other amendments?
I don't have any other amendments, but I just want to make sure staff knows that Councilor Belkat, I think, needs to be potentially moved over, and Leslie, if they haven't been already. Thanks.
Okay, so we're ready to present on Camp Bonneville update.
Good afternoon, councillors. This is Priya Dhanapal, and I'm the Deputy Public Works Director for Clark County. And here with me, we have Rocky Houston, Parks and Lands Division Manager, and Eric Harrison, Program Manager. We are here today to give you a background on Camp Bonneville and also clarify some questions we received on the Camp Bonneville Advisory Group. And with that, I'll pass it on to Rocky.
Thank you. Thank you, Priya. For the record, Rocky Houston, Division Manager, Parks and Lands. So in front of us, next slide please, is a presentation to provide a very high-level overview focused primarily on the cleanup actions that are required, and then we'll end with some questions that we do have that have come forth in regards to the development and assignment of the Camp Bonneville Advisory Group. So with that, next slide, please. So in front of you is a vision that was identified in the reuse plan in 11/15/2005. It identifies here as a regional park, but just to note that there are other uses that were identified on that list. And so there's this vision of that primarily utilized areas, the green area, that's kind of to the west side of it. There's a impact area that's going to be closed, sort of the pink and red lines would be closed areas for the public. And then most of the site, that yellowish tan color, would be conservation area, natural area that would potentially have trails, but be primarily focused on natural resource goals. Next slide. So providing a very high-level overview in regards to the decommission of Camp Bonneville. So for over 100 years, or roughly about 100 years, it was an Army base. It was used for training. There was actually 2 bases there utilized prior to World War I through World War II, all the way up until 1995, when there was a decision to close it. Between 1995 and 2011, there was feasibility transfer work that occurred that identified with an order from Ecology identifying what needs to be done and the transfer of ownership. There's a document that kind of tells what we're supposed to do, and that's called ESCA, or Consent Decree. A lot of acronyms with this project and this site, so I apologize. We're currently in phase 2, which is cleanup. So since about 2006 until today, and a few years into the advance, we've been working on those RAUs, or those remedial action units, to do the cleanup defined through the scope of the work that Ecology identified. And many of those have been completed, and we're finalizing that work. There's still a lot of work ahead of us and ahead of Ecology. Moving forward to phase 3 would be where we'd be doing a master plan. So once it's cleaned up, we've got a bow on it. We know what our institutional controls, what our maintenance needs are going to be. We would then move forward into determining on what that site's going to be for the county's use. And then, of course, phase 4 would be any construction. Next slide. I won't go through all of these, but it's just, this is out online and in your packet. There's several key milestones that occurred through the phase 1 pre-transfer feasibility and transfer. What I want to note is sort of flag 16 was the creation of the Clark County Citizen Advisory Group. That was a public participation engagement tool methodology for Department of Ecology, not for the county. And that was put on hold in 2011, and the Department of Ecology decided to move forward into their normal public engagement process at that time. Next slide. So through the phase 2 cleanup where we're in right now, these milestones here are primarily identified when we've completed the cleanup that was identified through our scope of work, through our contractor, and then we would do a cleanup action plan and present that to Ecology. They would review it and go through the public process, and then would come back with a finding of no further action. Those are identified by each unit of cleanup, and we have one of those remaining. There's a lot of bullet points over here, so next slide. So to summarize this, we have RAU 1, which is hazard waste contamination, is 100% complete. That definition of completion is based off of that finding of no further action by the Department of Ecology. RA 2A, lead contamination range, same status. 2B, demos. 2C, which is site-wide groundwater, it's also a hole in the ground, what do they call that? Landfill. So landfill number 4. Number 4, remediation. So that's still in process. Where we are there is that all the cleanups have been completed per the scope of work. Ongoing water monitoring is occurring and probably will continue to occur after this. And we're creating that cleanup action plan right now. It's in draft form and moving forward to public review sometime this year.
I have a couple of questions right now.
Yes.
So maybe just stepping back a little bit. So is it the county's responsibility at this point to complete the cleanup, or whose responsibility and who's paying for it?
Great question, Councilor Marshall. So it is the county's responsibility pursuant to that consent decree. There was federal dollars from the DOD that is paying for that cleanup. Roughly $83 million has been allocated for this cleanup, and most of that has been spent. And then once the site-wide cleanup action plan, so all the cleanup is approved pursuant to Department of Ecology, and we're looking at those long-term institutional controls, that's where our cost really comes in. And I think some of the concerns have been raised by community members in regards to what is that responsibility and what's that going to cost us, which are costs and concerns that we have as well.
And is it Ecology that determines the standard for cleanup? Do they give us the okay to move forward?
Yes, there's a state law and MTCA, which is
the model. I thank you for that question. So the MTCA is a Model Toxic Control Act, which is the state regulatory for all hazard contaminant cleanup.
And there is a federal set of rules that the EPA follows, but because the Department of Ecology is identified as a lead agency for this, we're following those state rules.
Okay, thanks.
The RAU3 has 4 phases, which is the cleanup of all the munitions and explosives of concern, which the Western Slopes, Central Impact Area, demo areas 1 and 2, and the Central Valley floor are 100% complete based off of what is defined as those scopes of work. By this saying 100% complete on these things, the county is not indicating, or staff is not indicating, that all 3,800 acres of the property has been cleaned to X standard. What we're stating is those things that were identified to be cleaned up were cleaned up, such as, for example, for roads and trails, there was a physical review with a metal detector, 20 meters on either side of existing roads. However, there wasn't the cleaning down of 14 or 28 inches, which would occur in some of those central impact areas, western slopes, where they actually removed soil down that far, removed everything. So these are the standards that we were told to do, and we met those standards.
And that was the result of the consent decree?
The consent decree and further engagement with the Department of Ecology and DOD over the last 20-some years.
And so as a percentage of the entire area, and I know there's different levels of cleanup, but are there areas that have not been really examined or cleaned up? It seems like that's one of the concerns that we're hearing about.
Yes, there are areas that are outside those typical impact areas, and I'm going to use the word, and I'm probably wrong, but lower probability of having munitions that were not cleaned up. And the long-term institutional controls is for those areas. We would continue to have staff that are trained that if there was identification of munitions, they go out, identify that site, and develop a removal plan with someone who's trained to do that.
How is that figured, the lower probability?
I'm not prepared to answer that question, ma'am.
Thanks.
Eric, can you touch on, for Councilor Marshall, like in the scope of the map, though, when she's talking about what that looks like? Can you talk a little bit more about that, since you're out on site and can speak to that?
Yes, ma'am. So if you go back to the first slide, the red is the central impact targeting area. That has been cleaned, surface and subsurface clean. The area that is in green, which is the reuse plan, there has been surface clean, which is with a metal detector. Any hits, they start digging in that area. So that was down to, and then that was surface and subsurface down to 14 inches in those areas identified in the reuse plan for park type activities. Some of the areas have not been cleaned. Those areas are as we stated, the low-level areas, and when we mean low-level, areas where you can't physically get to because of the geography of the site, very steep terrain, high density, organic that you can't get through. So some of those areas have not been cleaned. And please keep in mind that a lot of it has been cleaned based upon the reuse plan. So if we didn't specifically identify that we were going to do activities in this particular area of the park, that area was not the other areas were not considered for cleanup. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
So I'm finding some variance from what I've heard in the past, and so I'd like to clarify through my questions what I understood. And as far as low probability area, those were mainly the areas from which firing occurred from, not where the impact area was. The problem with this post, especially after World War II, was that some units took it upon themselves to maneuver and not necessarily use the range as it was set up. So there were some impacts outside of the central impact area. I understood the central impact area, because of the steepness of the terrain, to some extent wasn't cleaned at all, and it's about 500 acres, and it's going to be fenced off in perpetuity as best we can. So I did want to confirm that point, that there's about 500 acres that we can't be sure of. It wasn't cleaned to what we would have liked to because of the terrain. There's just no physical way to get in there.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. I'm not prepared to answer specifically how many acres were cleaned. I can get back to you, but I will say the side of fence, the central impact targeting area, has been completely fenced off based upon geographical areas. Some areas do not have a fence line because it's so steep we cannot get down in there. But a majority of the property, the site, has been surface and subsurface cleaned.
So I've heard a lot of public comment that's kind of very vague, but very concerned about other areas where the public may be, whether it's could be a trail or a dirt roadway at this point. And here's where I've never been able to get an answer. Over the many years, I've never been able to get an answer as to how much unexploded ordnance was actually found outside the central impact area. You know, you have your own little museum of stuff collected, and during my tour, and I was there during active cleanup and saw some of it picked up, they were all inert. They were training rounds. They were considered unexploded ordnance, but they had no high explosive in them. Whether you find them in a bazooka round in a Douglas fir, which they did find some, they were inert. So they pose no danger to anyone. Certainly we don't want them there, and they're litter, but they're not dangerous. So the question I've been posing over the years, I could never get an answer to: how many rounds did you actually find with high explosive in them that were basically considered duds, that were collected throughout Camp Bonneville? Because if the public hears that, hey, we never found one,
right,
then I think they'd have a lot more confidence when they take their dog for a walk or go horseback riding through the property.
So, Chair, to answer your question, are you talking site-wide, or are you referring just to the central impact?
Yeah, because the constituent concerns are site-wide. You know, the ordinance is everywhere. And I think there's some truth to some of those inert target rounds having been spread because some units maneuvered through the area instead of just sitting static on a range.
And you're correct. I mean, I'm military, so I understand that going through a troop movement area, we're going to have some pyro for exercises for indirect fire. To answer your question, I can go back and do some research. There was a report that specifically identified what munitions were found, and if there were high explosive or training rounds to that effect. So I can go back and find that report.
I think that would be helpful, especially to your committee and the public knowledge on the issue. And you would expect it early on, during the early stages of the cleanup. Yeah, they're going to find some duds. They're going to find some high explosive. But as they continue searching and get beyond the impact area, you would expect less and less dangerous material to be found.
And just of note, the central impact area was expanded from the original footprint, so I believe it was expanded by 150 acres. That's the number I'm thinking. I'm probably wrong with numbers, but it was expanded in regards to, again, to provide another level of security, risk management in regards to that. Ongoing, those concerns that are coming from the public are going to be those things that we continue to work through our institutional controls and through those long-term management plans and considerations when we get cleanup completed, and we're looking into that reuse implementation through that planning process.
Anecdotally, and I just want to comment for the record, because, I mean, I've been in areas where we had extensive minefields and we had to keep out of them. I ended up in one accidentally, but we have a herd of elk there. And,
yes.
You know, other countries I've been in, you know, the indigenous populations would run sheep, other heavy animals, just to be sure that it was safe. We have a herd of elk that live there. Have we ever had any known elk kicking up?
I've not heard of
any.
No, Chair, I have not heard of any triggered impacts.
And it is a robust herd. When we did a tour out there with the Camp Bonneville Advisory Group, we actually got to see them. So it's always it's epic whenever you do see a herd of elk, especially when they're not as tame as you see at some of these roadside areas, so habituated to man as much. So it was beautiful, so anecdotally. Next slide. All right. No problem. So again, to kind of summarize our cleanup closeout actions that we have in front of us. So we have a site-wide groundwater RAU 2C that we are in process of doing that draft report and hopefully getting public comment this year. So that would probably mean in 25 we would get a potential no further action comment or status to come to you for review. We have a 5-year review being RFP'd right now. So to step back, initially we were told or under the understanding before Eric and I were here that until all the cleanup was done, we did not have to do 5-year reviews. It was a verbal agreement between the parties, but it never met a formal adoption. As such, we now have identified those cleanup sites that we have completed. We are doing the 5-year review. And so here shortly, that'll be going out for RFP, and we're hoping to have that contracting done this year to allow us to take that 12 to 18 months to complete that. And then it would go to Department of Ecology for review.
Just the question dawned on me right now. We're waiting on the Department of Ecology study and recommendations on the Lacamas watershed. They were supposed to clean it last month, after a couple of delays. I don't know if it's been released because I haven't heard. You might have heard, but my question goes to this. As part of their survey of the Lacamas watershed, did they include Camp Bonneville? Because, I mean, we have waters moving through there. We have known pollutants there that we're monitoring. I'm wondering if that study looked, I mean, it's basically the headwaters of Lacamas Creek.
That's a good question, Councilor Matvanji. I can look into it and get back to you.
The Camp Bonneville Advisory Group, so that is something that we began and are now starting, and that's why we're here today, is to follow up on a couple questions that we have there. But the goal there is for them to assist in the review of that prior actions that occurred for the cleanup and those findings and no further action, and to develop elements for us to write a report to present to you in regards to concerns, questions, other, as we move forward to that site-wide action plan and those institutional controls. And then, of course, that site-wide closeout or that site-wide cleanup acts. That's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in regards to those long-term costs, institutional accruals for maintenance moving forward, such as there was a reference on one of the comments about wetlands. I believe the institutional controls to put a fence around that. So we'll have to manage that fence in perpetuity if it's not cleaned level around those wetlands. So those sort of things that those prior recommendations will get reviewed and pulled into one single document. And with there will be some costs, looking at annual 5, 10, 20 years for us. And then that goes to DOE for review and a decision. Counselor.
Yes, I have a question. Related to the advisory group, what is their time frame? There were some questions about how long duration it would be going or...
Great question, and actually we're going to get into that in the next couple of slides. Okay. So if you'll let me, I will, next slide. So just as a summary of the history is back in 2021, we had got feedback in Public Works in the county in regards to questions and concerns, and it was decided to develop 2 advisory groups, one on technical issues and one on policy advisory. And I think at that time there was this assumption that we were a year or 2 away from a master plan, so this is sort of pre-master planning sort of thoughts. These are my impressions, my comments on that. When I got here in late 2021, identified that we had several years ahead of us to go through the process to do the closeout, and it seemed premature, as well as there was no connective tissue in regards to those 2 committees. And it seemed that really we needed to focus on one committee that was focused on, the core question is, we hadn't had an outreach, we hadn't had an engagement at a county level on this project. And this allows us to kind of go through that review, kind of look at the books, what had happened, why was it done this way, and see where those questions are. So again, to hopefully answer the questions that are from the public and move forward as we look to doing that closeout to where as thorough as we can be. We'll never be able to answer all questions, but hopefully do the best we can there. So we came back in April of 2022 to get that direction. So we went forward, used the prior list of interested parties and identified that committee. And so in 2023, we went through that appointment process. We scheduled our first meeting. Some questions occurred in regards to the way we had set it up, as well as then we were looking to get the committee set up, but we moved forward with a small site tour to have those members go out and look at a portion of the property. Next slide. So back in 2022, we identified we were going to have 7 members, and then 2 additional members, one from the Parks Advisory Board and one from Land Use Planning. Again, we identified that we had 8. We had 2 people that were tied, so instead of going through a tiebreaker process, we added another person to the CAG. And we didn't engage those other parties because, again, it's not a park yet. We don't know what that final use is going to be. And so we just focused on those citizens as being a part of it. At the time, we talked about being about a 12-month or 12 to 18-month process to go through this review, which would line up, we hope, knock on wood, with when we start that site-wide cleanup action plan and to be able to be timely with that. And so its focus was on reviewing that prior work. And the authority was, it was advisory. It was to provide information and questions, to answer those questions and to provide questions, policy decisions in front of you as we move forward into that site-wide action plan. Next slide. And so through this process, we have 6 core questions that kind of came out of that first meeting, and I've sort of summarized them here, and staff's understanding of the status. And that's where we're here today, is to see the staff have it right. And if not, we want to make sure that we're in alignment with your view and vision of this cleanup, this advisory group, so that we can have a successful advisory group. So why do we have a 12-month schedule and appointments for 12 months? So typically we have appointments that are for a duration. We identify this as being a 12 to 18 month, and so we communicated initially that was going to be 12 months for that, and so those appointments would be associated with this process. Why are we requiring members to sign a charter? So the charter is used by the steering committees and limited duration advisory groups to provide clarity of the purpose of the advisory group, any deliverables, and ground rules for the advisory group. It is a tool to provide consistency for the county and the members of the advisory group. Essentially, it's best practice. So we know what the county is responsible for, and you as an advisory committee member are responsible for. Next slide. Why bylaws are not being used instead of a charter. So bylaws are generally developed by a board or a commission or long-standing advisory group, and is developed by the members of that group. This group is a limited duration advisory group and a limited focus advisory group. As such, the charter matches the mission. Is this advisory group replacing the citizen advisory group that ended in 2011? No. This is a county facilitated group. It has nothing to do with the Department of Ecology, and they chose to move forward to a different type of public participation process in 2011. Next slide. Will this advisory group be part of the master planning process? As an advisory group, no. However, the master planning process for a park would use the Parks Advisory Board and use stakeout or outreach as part of the planning process. So many members of that advisory group will most likely still be engaged and part of that process, but they wouldn't be a Camp Bonneville Advisory Group member at that time. What is the deliverable for the advisory group? The deliverable is participating in an overview review of the work completed and identifying questions that staff would culminate into a report for council. The focus is on understanding what was done and the potential impacts for the long-term institutional controls and management requirements for the site. And with that, I'm here to answer questions or seek direction.
Rocky, I just want to, can you go back one slide, Kristen? I just want to call out for council. When we went through the first meeting, I think this main piece of what current council wants to happen from this group is the deliverable. Is that what you want us to focus on with this group? Cleanup for each area, what if it's completed? So that's the main piece that we're asking for today from direction from council is what is our deliverable for that group? Is that still the direction that you want to go as far as the advisory group? As was brought up in public comment today, we have other items that need to be discussed with the site, fire suppression, how we're currently using the facility with the shooting range that the sheriff's office uses and FBI. So there's other things that are happening, I think, that get lost. So I want to make sure that we are delivering on what the CAG group is intended to do. So that was, I just want to call that out for council before we moved on.
Okay, let's start the discussion on the dais. Glenn, Sue, questions, comments?
Well, I guess the cleanup, it sounds like there's still, we're not really completed the cleanup. There's still some uncertainty about the cleanup. So I think the cleanup fundamentally needs to be focused on and completed before we move forward. I am concerned about the wildfire related issues. As it's been explained to me, this is a challenging site, and then noise would be the other thing that I've heard some concerns about, the shooting range and what possible mitigation can be put into place there. And this would all be before we actually get to the uses and the master planning and all. This is all preliminary to make that possible.
So for the wildfire risk, staff is working. We're working on a fire break to be integrated into an existing timber management project that we have in that same area. So that is something we're scoping right now to see if we can get done in 2024 or in 2025 to get that buffer. However, that's our management side of it, not something that we feel is a cleanup-related activity for the advisory group. So I just want to clarify that. We want that feedback, and that the feedback we've got has helped us prioritize and engage on some of those questions to make sure that we are ready. And there's some great ideas that came out when we were on site, but I just want to let you know that. And from a sound element is, when we do develop our new agreements and get those all finalized, there are hours of use and limitations clearly defined there to assist with some of the historical concerns that have been raised on times and days of the week.
So before I turn it over to Glenn, I thought the fire break was done like 2 years ago, and we have a forester out there, and we're actively harvesting and collecting revenue from that. You kind of made it sound like we're still figuring out how to do it. I think that's been ongoing for years.
It has been ongoing, and what we do have thinning projects. I think it was 180 acres that we just thinned in the last year, so there's that. But this is specific. We have a road that we've been clearing as a fire break, but we're looking at extending it to a 60 or 80-foot boundary all the way around, as well as reaching out to our neighbors, because there is a cut agreement that could occur where we could go an additional 25 feet on their side if they give us permission to, again, expand it to a wider fire break to address those concerns about a fire that originated on the property and going away.
So, but my point is, it's mainly done, it's in the works. I know, I think the neighbors are grateful, although they keep asking for more as far as a fire break, and they've done their part on their property line. There may be some tweaking to do, but it's, that's well in progress.
Yeah, it's ongoing management, and we're trying to enhance that break to address the ongoing concerns we have, yes.
Perfect.
Just on that subject real quick, do we have a professional at the county that knows that specific subject, or are we getting outside help on advice for how to do that?
Great question, Councilor Young. We do have a forester. The county forester is housed on the camp at times and at 78th, so we do have that resource, and any additional resources beyond that, we then contract out to do that. So.
Okay, great. And then my question was, and I agree, one step at a time, we got to get some things checked off before we move, but what is the intention in terms of gathering input from the community for what eventually will be there? Is that kind of what you're here to ask about, is what are we doing with this CAG? Is it going to continue on, or what are the thoughts on that?
Great question. So I think of it's two different rings of public engagement. So we have one that's focused on the cleanup and looking in the rearview mirror, in helping you in regards to that determination of what that cleanup action plan and what we want to have as those institutional control responsibilities in the future. So there's decisions that have been made in the past in regards to cleanup. So we went 14 inches instead of 24 inches. That means a difference in regards to some of our institutional controls and costs moving forward. Not all 3,800 acres was cleaned up. So those are those sort of things. And so we want to make sure we get a clear understanding filtered from the public through our advisory committee, and potentially there'll be a public process when we do the cleanup action signs through the Department of Ecology. But our question is, what we've laid out the focus for the cleanup, the Camp Bonneville Advisory Group, is that the direction you guys want it to be, or do you want this to be an ongoing, long-term committee that is like Parks Advisory Board or some of these other long-standing? Our interpretation when we met before was this was a short-focused, so it was limited duration. It was an action group to talk about a specific thing. An example would be the steering committee for Heritage Farm. That was a short-term, limited group that came together to be appointed to work on a specific thing, not the Heritage Farm Advisory Team, which is a longer-term advisory group. Long-term, there may be an advisory group that's needed for this site, but until we complete the cleanup and then move into the master planning and determine what those uses are. We won't know what expertise we want on that, or what that's going to look like, or if an existing advisory group or board would be that appropriate resource.
So my initial thought is that that it would make sense essentially to kind of restart the committee once you get to that point. And perhaps some of the people that are currently serving would make sense to be on that committee. But you're right. I mean, it's a different area of expertise and advice and, you know, input that we're seeking. So that's just my initial thought.
Karen? Michelle? Comments? Questions?
My comment is that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the rather amorphous way of the whole committee being approached. I got a cough, I'm sorry. It seems like the cleanup was done in a way that maybe met current objectives at the time rather than something that was a definable result that people wanted to have as a consequence that would be known, so that the cleanup effort that had been done was a known fact. And even right now, the deliverable for the advisory group seems like it's just kind of floating out there and not really clear that what it is that we want done. So my thinking would be to just our word seems to be pause today, to put a pause on this thing and back up and look at it and say, what do we want out of this? Which I think is the very thing that you're asking from us today, but to give it some definition. So if the advisory group is to give some longer term understanding for the many issues that come up all the time, regularly, with regard to Bonneville, and that this is the group that we're going to turn to for an answer, then we ought to know that. And it ought to be on paper somewhere that that is a part of their role. So that's what I'd like to see happen. And it wouldn't be a complicated process, just something that would entail a few people who are familiar with Bonneville, familiar with what advisory groups can do, to outline what it's all about and what its limitations are. But it does have responsibilities and what they are too.
And Councilor Bowerman, staff thought that the charter was accomplishing that element. And so are you indicating that, and I just want to clarify what you said, for a second there, it sounded like you wanted a review and have a longer standing, more advisory group.
You know, what does the charter say is to be the responsibility of this group?
The responsibility of the group is to review prior.
Yeah, this is Kathleen, if I can, just really quick. So, and I know Rocky talked about this during his presentation, but, you know, initially we wanted the group to say, what could we use Camp Bonneville for in the future? But then there were so many questions regarding the cleanup, and if we were actually in compliance with all the cleanup, we did a thorough job and documented, and it was seen that we weren't quite there. So this group was actually redirected to be part of that lens of reviewing the documentation, reviewing the cleanup, and making sure that we're in compliance, that the safety is being met and all of that. And then once that was complete, then the next step would be, okay, now that we're comfortable that we know what has happened or what still needs to happen, and we're at a place of, okay, what do we want to do with this in the future? So, and Rocky, is that accurate? So today they are supposed to be reviewing the cleanup, the documentation, and identifying where we have gaps or we still need to do some work with the other jurisdictions to ensure that it is a property now that we can take to the next level. Is that correct?
Kathleen, are you saying that that is their responsibility according to charter?
I don't know if they've had the charter completed yet. This is a new group. That was the intention and that was direction for council. And I'll have to look to staff to say, has the charter been drafted and adopted by them? But that was the specific direction that was given to this group.
Well, a specific direction and then having a charter are miles apart. So I think somewhere in between there needs to be clarity as to what their job is, and not a big deal, but just to put it on paper so that it is known what they're responsible for so that they can do it. And they'll be happy to do it, I think, once they know what it is. But people tend not to be real pleased with the work that they're being asked to do when it's unclear and they don't know exactly what it is. So I think that would be the next step. If Rocky, so in answer to your question, if you kind of thought maybe there was a charter, apparently there isn't, but to have something close to that was on paper would be a very good step, I think, for this group to have as a part of its structure.
Yeah, and Councilor Bowerman, I do apologize. I must be remiss. I thought I sent as part of my packet a copy of that draft. If it didn't get to you, I'll make sure it gets out to everyone by the end of today so that you can see that. So we do have a draft, and we revised it based off of input at our first meeting. So and I can see where if you don't have a document, it is hard for you to say here's what it says, and I do apologize for that. But we believe that we have a document that provides that clarity, and that's where we just want to make sure we're in alignment with that initial request on how we refocused it based off of what Kathleen stated. That is correct, sort of from a broader what's this going to be in the future to a review of that cleanup and future actions for that institutional control.
I want to add one more thing to that. When we met our first meeting of this group, we have a varying array of folks that had have no knowledge of Bonneville to folks that have tremendous knowledge of the happenings that have happened in the history in the last, 30 years. What we want to ensure as we restarted is a clear focus, and to Councilor Bowerman's point, we had that draft charter, and what we want to know from this current council is that what we should be focusing on, because we'll run with it, but we want to make sure we're on the right track, that this is what we're focusing on. Cleanup, looking for gaps is what Kathleen stated, making sure we're in, looking at it from Department of Ecology. Is there something we've missed over the last 25 years? As you can imagine, that's a ton of information, and Eric has been great breaking it down for everybody, but that's a lot of information to get through to look at the cleanup. So that's what the intention is today, to make sure we have clarity from our current council that we're on the right track. This is the scope that we want to do, and that's what will be part of the charter for this group.
Well, I apologize.
Michelle?
It was sent that it wasn't reviewed completely by me, and that could very well be the case. But I would volunteer to do that now and take a look at it and see if it is clear. Is it clear relative to the many issues that we have raised today and the ones that will come up for the Bonneville people as they go through the process?
Councilor Bowerman, I think from attending that group, it's clear. I think the folks that are part of the group want different things. So I think it's our responsibility as county staff to say, what are we focusing on first? Is it how we're going to use the property in 20 years? Is it anything that we're investing in it now? I think that's where we are looking to your guidance from council is, are we literally just focused on the cleanup and making sure we didn't miss any gaps before our cleanup action report goes forward? So we want to this is such a huge scope of work. We just want to make sure that we're in that path, but there is a differencing of opinions in part of the group, and that's why we've laid this out the way that we have, and we want to be sensitive to that there is different layers that certain folks of the committee or the group want, but we want to make sure that we're following council's policy direction in, is it the cleanup that we're focusing on now? And then we could extend the group later on to look at uses, or extend the group later on to look at ways that we have different areas of the camp that we're looking at. Hope that helps.
It does. Having a limited start right now, just on the cleanliness aspect, may be a good way to begin, as you've stated, and then call it a time to relook at it at that point, because that gives it a start and an end that we know what it is. And we'd also need to know what is the standard that is being employed with that cleanup, and to be clear on that, because apparently there's still disagreement on that.
And I think with the rich history of this property, we're going to continue to have that happen. But I think if we do our due diligence with the group, so there's transparency to look at that cleanup and make sure that we are looking, I know that us as staff, we definitely have some questions and concerns as well. And things have changed over the last 25 to 30 years. To your point, Councilor Bowerman, about the checklist that was years ago is not the checklist that we look at now. So we need to look at that and identify so council has the best information possible. So we just want to make sure that we're in the right direction so we can get this solidified.
Michelle, did you have comments or questions?
I do. I actually, a few months ago, I had somebody ask me about Camp Bonneville and what was happening as far as remediation was going, because they had some interest in future use of how Camp Bonneville was going to be used. And I had to look up some information myself, and I'm looking at it right now, actually. The Camp Bonneville facts page for Clark County, it probably needs to be updated because there's some information, and I don't know. I know, Rocky, the information that you presented right now, I don't know how current it is. I mean it is the most current, but I don't know who's looking at the Camp Bonneville facts page for the county, because it has come up a couple of different times with constituents, and it's a little confusing if you look at it to know what the status of what's happening right now. I don't know how often people are updating that.
Yeah. Councilor Belcott, you are correct. We identified that as a item to work. We've been focused on these other elements in this preparation, but we're working with our PIO in regards to making that a cleaner site. And there's a lot of redirects on that page as well to Ecology's site. And so it needs a major makeover. I agree.
Sue, I've seen you reaching for your button. Before I give my comments and questions, go ahead.
Great, thanks. As for direction from the council, I think having heard everything, it makes sense to me to continue that focus on the cleanup, any gaps, and what standard are we trying to achieve. I think when you start talking about uses, people, it's a great resource. People are eager. There's lots of opinions, but I think this is, if we're moving in phases, let's get this phase really locked down.
Okay, so one, if you haven't been out there, go. Get a tour, meet with the forester, have him part of the tour, and see what's out there. This is among, and I know the managers know this because I complain about it all the time. I mean, this is one of this. I've never had an ulcer, but this is going to give me an ulcer. So I'm almost thinking, forget it. Do what you want to do. You know, I'm not even sure that our grandkids are ever going to be able to walk on Camp Bonneville at the pace we're going. You know, same thing, I can't even get a walking trail at Heritage Farm, and there are no unexploded ordinance there. You know, I don't know what the deal is, but this is a primary example of how bureaucracies can just go and go and go. In the Army, we used to call them self-licking ice cream cones. You know, you don't need anybody else involved. They'll just keep doing their thing. On the history that you've given here, you missed some of it. You know, and I've only been here since 2019. But right then, that year, prior manager, cleanup's done. We're going to be done in a couple months. Then the question is, okay, do we hire a consultant? Do we put a committee together? And the answer was, yeah, let's put a committee together. And as we were walking to the dais to appoint the committee members, it was canned. We didn't hire a consultant. But there is a graphic out there that shows a notional array of activities out there, everything from RV parking to hiking trails. It's been mapped out. I think as long as we keep this as vague as possible, nothing will ever happen out there. I really would promote a much different approach at this point. I mean, I was convinced, I had unreasonable expectations back in 2019 that we would be able to accomplish getting an equestrian center of excellence like some counties do in Washington State or in other states, because we've got the perfect location for it, perfect terrain. We have volunteers out there that ride horses on trails, and they have experts, and they can design the trail for you. We've got pretty good views if you hike the higher areas there. That's why all people build homes out there. You get pretty good vistas. We can do that. We can build trails. We can build an equestrian center. You know, the range is a problem for some people. I mean, the neighbors, you're always going to have disparate interests, especially with the neighbors. And the neighbors want absolutely nothing to happen there. You know, they want their fire break, and they want the forest thinned, and that's what they would like to continue to look at and maybe see the elk herd walk by every now and then. And so, you know, one of the things we've eliminated, the VA showed an interest in extending a VA cemetery, because there is an existing cemetery there. That got canned because the transfer documents didn't allow for an expansion of the cemetery. So that was one potential use of about 20 acres, I think. What we really, I think, what a better direction if we ever really want to see some progress is maybe to look at a consultant. Take that one diagram we had, that one overlay of activities, and start from there and say, what do we want, what do we don't want? I think the guidance should come from the county. Here's what we're proposing. Then go to the public and say, what are your ideas? Do you like this? Because otherwise we'll never make any progress, I don't think. So, you know, I'm just anxious for us to get something done here in the time frame, but now I don't even think I'll be alive to see it happen, much less your grandkids at the pace we're going. So I know that sounds pretty pessimistic, but I'm looking at this timeline that you had here. That's 2029 to adopt the master plan. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of interest from the mayor here in Vancouver to the veteran community, of which I'm a member. We had no veterans home anywhere in this region, and they would like to see a veterans home at Camp Bonneville. It's a perfect location. Transfer documents don't allow for housing. So the question is out there, and I've been talking to our local congresswomen about it. We need your help, because the state veterans office is like, oh my God, that would be great. It's close to your Vancouver campus. It's close to Portland's veteran campus for medical care, essentially. We would love that. So the question was posed a couple of years ago, all right, can we change that transfer document? Is there a mechanism for amending it? Can we, you know, I know you don't want to build homes out there, you don't want to have housing of any kind, but could it be allowed for a veterans home? And I've never heard another answer. So I've been pushing back to constituents and saying, talk to your congresswoman, talk to the state, keep talking about it, maybe someone will look into it. I would like to find out, is there a process to amend those transfer documents? Because I certainly would love to see a veterans home up there. We haven't talked about it all, potable water. I mean, the infrastructure out there is pretty marginal. I mean, I don't think we have potable water. I don't think we have even a good septic system. Certainly we don't have sewer there. And of course, the roadways in and out would be challenging if we did have the public coming in more numbers. So those are, you know, maybe the best thing to do is figure out how to hire a consultant and come up, teed off that original plan that was, and I don't know who drafted it or when it was drafted or when it was last updated, but at least it was something concrete that you can visualize, and then you can say, well, I'd rather see an equestrian center over on this part. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. Do whatever you want. It's been frustrating to watch this process, and I will just give one other comparison. You know, in the military, we often exercise when we're not actively in combat operation, and you exercise certain scenarios. And it's one of those things where I know that and I'm not going to mention the country, I've been in one country that we exercise different exercises twice a year, and it's like you just repeat the same thing year after year after year, and it's been going on for 60 years. So you learn all kinds of things each time you exercise a new scenario, but nothing changes. Nothing actually moves forward. It's kind of like our third quarter. Anyway, those are my comments.
Yes, thank you. So I think that my personal opinion is that at some point in time, we can get this to a place where we can start planning, even though the cleanup is not necessarily completely finished. And I don't know what that is, because I don't know if in the process of gathering input, if we would need to have it opened for, you know, people to come in and visualize to be able to understand what goes there. But I do agree that we should consider an outside consultant to work with this, because I would imagine that this is a matter of resources for your department. You don't have the manpower to do this, more than likely. So I don't know what the funding implications of that would be, and I don't want to legislate here, you know, based on that, but I would like to see some sort of information on that, on whether that could be feasible and whether that could be worked into the budget to kind of work, you know, the parts that you're not able to do with, you know, the level of staffing that you have currently. You know, something to the degree of maybe a you know, consulting firm that can do some sort of a community assessment and question surveys, reach out however they can for initial ideas, and then maybe screen those ideas for things that really aren't possible for whatever reason that may be. And then that information could be fed to an advisory group, and we could go through the process that way, you know, to at least get started on what do we want here, what can we do, what do we see in this property for the future? But I do think that it, I mean, I do agree with the chair that we're getting nowhere really fast, and I think it's a matter, like I said, of resources. So if we have that capacity, and if that is what is holding us up, I would definitely be supportive of looking into a way that we could fund some outside support for it.
I just have a clarifying question, just after hearing that feedback. So I just want to make sure if we need to close a track that we're currently on and looking at exploring, we can do both at the same time. Exploring a consultant for planning and use for what this property could be, and then are we still continuing the advisory group with the community for the cleanup piece while we're working through the cleanup? We're in the final phases of that. So I want to make sure, clarity-wise, that we're clear that we can look into the consultant and look at the planning process and definitely go down that track. But are we continuing the advisory group for the cleanup while we're finishing these last phases? Because that's why I just want to make sure we're not discounting one to do the other, or if we're doing both of them at the same time, we need to be clear about what our guidance
is to staff. I feel like we're back in 2007 when we had two committees, and then it seemed like things stopped. But it sounds to me that there progress is being made related to the cleanup in this committee and identifying gaps, and it just seems to me that there needs to be assurance for the public on that regard. And if this committee is helping us get there, well, let's continue their work. I have no problem with simultaneously, looking at uses. If we can shave off a few years, complete this within Councillor Medvedji's lifetime, that would be a good thing.
Ever long as it may be.
And just to clarify is when staff had said cleanup is completed previously, that is a correct statement. We're going through all the closeout documentation that gives us that step forward where ecology has a different role with us, DOD has a different role with us, and because of the timeline of getting through these steps, so that was the risk that I was concerned with initially starting a master planning process. Again, managing expectations because we could have a plan done and there's a surprise in regards to what ecology says we have to do. So that was the risk, but we'll revisit that based off the feedback we got today.
And I know, Rocky, you haven't
Amber,
been.
yes, you have my thumbs up on it, and that's the issue out in the community, though, the narrative that cleanup's not even done.
And I think it's the standard of what cleanup means, and I think we've tried, and Eric does a great job when he gives the tours out there to talk about that, is Department of Ecology and the partners have defined what cleanup means, and cleanup, I think, means things, saying that means a lot of different things. So what Rocky's saying is correct, and I know I want to hand it to Kathleen because she was trying to say something. Kathleen?
Go ahead.
I believe that Rocky is probably correct today, but when it was said before Rocky's time, we did find we did not have the direct, not necessarily direction, the information to support that the cleanup was done. So that is why we pivoted to make sure that that's done right. So I don't want to lose sight of that because I know one of the counselors was here during that time where we had a lot of constituents talking about that, and the county made mistakes. We made statements and we provided direct or recommendations that weren't based on facts, which is why we pivoted to say, we need to make sure this cleanup is done because we're putting the cart before the horse. So I will trust that Rocky and everybody is saying what they're saying today. I don't know if this advisory group would agree with that, because that was their whole role, was to look at that. And I don't know if they've actually met more than 1 or 2 times to even review it. So we need to make sure that we are circling back to make sure we did what we said we're going to do. What we're saying today is accurate, and then we can certainly do the 2 processes moving forward. But I don't want to lose sight on the county messed up before, and we need to take ownership of that and make sure we're not doing that again.
That approach that you're suggesting sounds just great. But Kathleen, I've got 2 thumbs and they're both down. And that's with regard to a consultant. If I hear the word consultant again with regard to just about any project, I think I'll scream. And it would certainly be the case with this one, because a consultant could come up with 50 different ideas, all of which would be so good. And we'd all get behind one or this one or that. Oh my goodness, no. Let's not do a consultant right out of the chute. Let's get the cleanup thing clarified and then go forward. And we can go forward as our own consultants.
Please keep an open mind, because the paths that we've been under the last 20 years have gotten us nowhere. That's why I recommended starting from the diagram that we already have, what I considered the future plan at one point. We need to do something different. Maybe I don't like hiring consultants either, especially when we have all that expertise out there. Do I want to hire someone to build a trail? No, we've got horsemen out there that know how to put trails. They'll even build them for us, through volunteer efforts. But the path that we're on is it's just a staggering little progress just in the last 5 years. So anyway, just please keep an open mind as the staff, maybe there is a portion of it that they could use some professional help. I guess the bottom line for me is we need to hand something to this advisory group as a starting point and say, here's what we're thinking today. And then let them go from there.
When we get to that, because I think that this advisory group, the scope is cleanup. And then we stick, and then I know I hear you, Chair Mevigi, but I think if we get this too large from the get-go, we can't get the initial piece done. And that was our reason coming today, is it's like, we want this 12 months, get the cleanup reviewed, make sure that we've hit all the I's and crossed the T's and made sure the county did their part. To Kathleen's point, there has been some messes over the years with this project because time and handoffs and different people in charge and all those different things that have into that. So that's our direction while Chair, looking at options of planning. If that's our marching orders, we will go forth and meet with our group and start looking at those documents.
Sounds good.
I have a comment.
Okay.
And didn't we have consultants in the past that assisted with this cleanup? I could have sworn we did.
We had a contractor. We had a contractor that did the cleanup, Weston. We've also have consultants who are doing ongoing work with us. So PBS is a contractor we have now, our consultant group that's doing the water testing. We have a contract with them doing the cleanup action plan for this existing RAU 2C. Thank you. And we will hire another consultant to do the 5-year plan and another professional outside of our realm to probably do that site-wide to make sure that we're in compliance with those rules as we move forward. And we do have staff, planning staff, from a recreational perspective. You're right, Chair, that there are renderings out there in regards to that sort of regional park looking and associated. We have a menu of those things. So that was our approach, was to start from there as we move forward. And I think, our interpretation, our contracts are completed. All of DOE is saying that the things are done. Now we're just supporting it through this cleanup action report, so that checks and balances so that we can make sure. And if there's a gotcha moment through this review or through the cleanup action plan, that brings it back to DOD and DOE for us to look at getting those things completed.
Chair. Chair.
Michelle, does that satisfy? I mean, this is all great discussion, and you keep mentioning it, and I just want to make this clear for the public, because we talk about cleanup pretty generically.
Yes.
There's ordinance cleanup.
Yep.
And then, they had a dump, a toxic dump there that we had to clean up, and luckily it was some good solid clay that was somewhat contained. It does not appear to be migrating, which is the consultant you're talking about as far as doing the continuing monitoring along that area as well as the creek. So we need the environmental issues other than ordinance, they're all very separate.
Right.
Chair, before we move on from this topic, I just want to close a loop on the question you asked about the watershed. I reached out to Devin while we've been talking. Yes, Camp Bonneville is in the Lacamas watershed assessment. The closest monitoring point is downstream at mile 13.3. So it is. I just wanted to close that loop.
Thank you. So anything else, or do you have the guidance you need? All good perspectives and comments. Thank you, Rocky.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time and the engagement on this.
All right, 2.3 is hearkening back to our board assignments, and
This should be, Chair, this should be a quick discussion. This is just recapping what council had decided last week. There's a couple pieces on here that had a couple questions. The Callis one, there's nothing for council to do right now. They'll be coming before you on a Tuesday meeting. I would ask probably Kristen potentially to highlight the CJC in the event that Chair Mebage, if you want to still look at having somebody else cover those meetings. And so I guess the main question today, is there anything that you see that doesn't make sense, doesn't reflect from last week, or any changes after you see this in its entirety?
So as Councilor Marshall was talking to me just before the meeting, pointing out that I have 19 assignments. Now, I know some of those probably don't meet. I guess what I would like eventually is to find out right away which ones are really inactive, which ones only meet once a year or once every other year. She did express an interest in the Law and Justice Committee, which is, it's hard for me to give up something like that just because it's been pretty much 40 years of my life doing that work. But on the other hand, if I really do have 19 committee assignments, plus the opioid abatement and other things that pop up, I would even shed that one. And she has expressed an interest in taking that committee. Anyway, so I would like to learn a little bit more about how active, if this is accurate as to how often they meet.
I was wondering, Kathleen, did you ever find out what the status is with the JPAC seat?
No, I don't have any update on that. And I don't think Jordan's probably called either. So we don't have an update for that today.
Because the CTRAN CEO is getting ready to vacate. So I was wondering about that, and I would be more than happy to take that.
So anyway, we're pretty much, as far as an annual task of getting assigned to committees, we're kind of ahead of the game a little bit. We've made these assignments later into the year before. So is there anything else anyone wants to talk about today, or otherwise we'll let this digest?
I just have a couple of comments. I expressed some interest in not being on the audit committee, but I'm willing to stick with that one. And I would just say, if anyone is interested, the Area Agency on Aging, actually there is a remote opportunity to participate. So if that makes that committee appealing for anyone, I'll just toss it out there. And I don't think we've identified alternates, so that might be something to look at too.
And Kathleen, just to clarify, on the right column where it's talking about how often we meet, that was updated recently, right? That's a current, Kristen? Okay, so I know Chair Mebage just asked that, so I just want to make sure we clarified.
So if there aren't any other comments, I would just say generally teeing off the alternate issue too. So there's a lot of pop-up committees, and for instance, the jail modification committee. Oh my God, that one's important right now. It's hot, as many others are. If you can't make it, have someone else sit in for you. Just don't show up. So the alternate idea, we should have alternates for every single one of these, and then it's incumbent upon accounts where if they can't make their meeting, to call another counselor who's the alternate and say, hey, I can't do it, can you do it? Some of these are just so important, we just can't have absences that are unannounced. Knowing that things come up all the time, like snowstorms. I was worried about getting in today, but Kathleen, is that why you're still home? Are you snowed in?
Yes, it's beautiful. Okay, so we'll keep
can we
this,
leave this?
Yeah, we can leave this now. We can revisit it again at a later time if needed. And of course, for alternates, if you can't get a hold of your alternate, call us in the office and we can help facilitate another counselor stepping in for you. So thank you.
Super. So any problem leaving this item? Okay, so we'll move on then. to 2.4, the FRDU, which we've gotten some emails and comments today as well. We'll move on to that. I do want to make some general comments as we enter into it, because this is very problematic for me, and on a number of levels. The first one is people are confusing the FRDU comprehensive update work that needs to occur with the troubles that are going on with PVJR. They're really two separate issues. I mean, we need to do this comprehensive update. It is our railroad. That's what the consultant is for, regardless of who the operator is. And quite frankly, what will come out of this, hopefully, is some progress on how do we do it? Can it be done? Is it feasible? You know, the consultant may come back and say, you know, your railroad is as good as it can be. There just isn't, there aren't other places to put any industry. And, you know, we're not, so people understand, we have never, the executive branch, the council has never waived any property use restriction, whether it's stormwater runoff and buffers, critical areas, you name it, fish, you know, protection of fish and wildlife. Nothing's waived, nothing's changed. So no matter what work the consultant does in identifying, if he can, places where these overlays can go, the environmental protections will always remain. We're not going to just pave over and industrialize the center of the county. The governor signed this bill. The legislature passed it for one reason: opportunity for economic survival, for economic development. We just passed fairly recently our population projections. We need, and I've heard up to 60,000, maybe it's even 90,000 jobs over the next 20, 30 years. We need to have jobs. We know that. It's economic development opportunity. They have to go somewhere. And what some of this work that the staff had been doing previously before it was suspended, and hopefully the consultant will get to some of it as well, you know, what are the uses? We already know there are some restricted uses just by the legislation itself. But if we can get clean industry with family wage jobs for our county residents, and we need thousands of them, we can get heavy material off our roads, we can reduce our carbon footprint. The FRDU can be a huge boon. It's an opportunity to keep people from, and we've got, and I've heard estimates, 40 to 7,000 are paying income tax in Oregon because they're commuting every day for a better job that they can't find in Washington and in Clark County. So it's an opportunity. This consultant is hired for that purpose of planning in our comprehensive update cycle. And so it would be really irresponsible on our parts to suspend it. I think it's closed out. We already have the RFP out there. It's already been budgeted. And that kind of gets to the other level of frustration with this. You know, you can have a lot of divisiveness on this council if you want it. And one of the things you need to do, and you know, we looked at this issue. We had a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions, and we voted on it, and it passed. Then we had a budget, and there was an attempt to pull the funding from the budget. There were a lot of good questions, a lot of good discussion, and once again, it was kept in the budget by majority vote. So you can keep attacking the votes of your fellow counselors at every opportunity, but you know, it'll remove a certain level of collegiality, And it gets into the issue of this is purely, however you characterize it, a reconsideration of the votes. We also, on a consent agenda, had an attempt to pull one of the grants to maintain the railroad, to restore it. That gets us into a whole different area. We're in a period right now where the investigations are not done by all the agencies that are involved. Everyone's given this attention appropriately, from the executive branch and all of our code enforcement, the Attorney General for the state, Corps of Engineers, Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board, you name it. Everyone that has a part of this is weighing in and taking a hard look at what needs to be done, what has been done, what the restoration effort will look like. It's all in progress. Nothing's been conclusive yet. We have a legally binding lease. It is not an at-will contract. We have to follow the terms of the lease. And if we start pulling funding and restoration of the railroad, if we start pulling that funding, we're going to put ourselves in legal jeopardy on that lease. And that's something we need to talk about in executive session if a couple of members want to continue to pursue this. We have a legal obligation to upend our end of the bargain on this lease, and that lease includes a favorable business operating environment and our requirement to maintain certain portions and to seek grants and to seek the FRDU. So I understand the public's angst with this. It is well-founded, but it's being addressed. Unfortunately, these processes take a little longer than we would like. The investigations are starting to conclude, and appropriate communication with the lessee is occurring with the executive branch. It also harkens into, okay, Robert's rules, at some point, if these re-votes or reconsideration become vexatious, it's not really defined, but it's an abuse of the voting process. And at some point, we need to maybe adjust our own rules to say how many bites at the single subject do you get. So this is very problematic to even add it to the agenda. I didn't want to do so because the timing is just so poor in the position we're in right now with all these investigations going on. So the last point I want to make is this is for our comprehensive update. This will inform us whether this is feasible to move forward with the FRDU ultimately or not. So those who are absolutely opposed to generating the possibility of jobs for our county in this area that the state and governor wanted to put in place for Clark County, I got it, but I think you're really not considering the needs of the entire county. So anyway, with that in mind, how do you wish to proceed?
I have a question.
Chair, I have a point of clarification.
Hold on, is that Karen Bowerman?
Yes, it is. I have a question
Go
that I'd
ahead.
like to direct to Kathleen. Is there a link from our prior discussion to the FRDU consultant RFP that would show that document? And here's why I ask. On our agenda, 99 times out of whatever, 100, the links are shown to what the current discussion will be, and there is no link on this particular line item. And a couple of constituents asked for it, and I said, well, we could probably get that from the prior discussion. Is that so? Is it linked from before? Could you point us to that?
There's no link for today, but certainly if constituents want to see the prior discussion, those links are online.
And where would that be?
be on the council website where all of the agenda items are, and constituents can put in the date range from like January 1 to December 31 and type in freight rail dependent use and it'll pull it up.
Okay. That's pretty much what I told them. They were hoping for specificity, I think, like a link.
Yeah, I'm more than happy, Councilor Bowerman, to find that and send you the link that you can share to those who asked you a question.
I think given that they are into the discussion deeply and would really like to be informed, that would be super helpful for them. Thank you.
Chair, I have a point of clarification. Related to the freight rail dependent use and the $100,000 contract, my understanding is that is for development of the rules and the public outreach, just related to the 400 acres that have already been designated freight and that have the overlay freight rail dependent use. And as I recall, our discussion that we had is that we decided to move forward just with that 400 acres because otherwise it rolled into the comp plan update. So I see there's two different tracks here. There's the 400 acres and then there's whatever may come up in the comprehensive plan. So I'd like some clarification on that, just that piece. I don't know if I can get it today, but I think it's important.
So we don't have Oliver on. Who crafted the actual?
We do have Oliver on. Let me see. Oliver, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon. I am
do
online.
Yeah, and so I do want to be clear, Oliver hasn't prepared anything for today. This was an agenda item that was added from council, from a couple councilors. So, but Oliver can certainly answer any questions if he knows the answer offhand.
Yes, Councillor Marshall, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I was asking about the $100,000 contract. I understood that the council had agreed to move forward with that just related to the 400 acres that already have the freight rail dependent use overlay on them, and that one of the reasonings for that was that if there was a desire to expand that, that would fall under the comp plan update.
That's my understanding, Councillor. We are not looking at the entire length of the railroad, and we are not looking at applying any future overlay beyond the area where that overlay is currently applied.
Great, thank you for that.
And then that's my understanding from the direction of our council.
Right. I think, this is big and complex and there's multiple layers to it. My reasoning for having this on the agenda really wasn't to remove the $100,000 or to say no to freight rail dependent use, but to pause until we can get a firmer idea of what is going on related to all the regulatory concerns. And this is in part, I think, could benefit PVJR, that with all the uproar in the community, I think that community outreach, they're not going to be pleasant meetings. And I don't believe that we have the ability to say definitively what we're able to regulate given the operator's assertion that he's preempted from a lot of these regulations. So I think until we can provide some assurance to the public that these are the regulatory frames that go with any kind of use along the railroad, I think just waiting a month or two, if we look back the last couple of months, a lot more has been revealed. I think if we could provide more assurance to the public moving forward with any kind of public process, it would be beneficial to the public, the railroad operator, and to the staff, because I have seen in the past what they're faced with when things are sprung on the public or there's not clear answers. So those are my concerns.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so I disagree with your view of how this went forward. This is not to dig up something that was already been decided. This was to have an updated discussion given lots of new information that has presented itself since original discussion. And I think it would be unwise not to do so on any subject. If, there's material changes and there are extenuating circumstances, we have an obligation to bring a subject back up. I've done a lot of homework on this subject, and I made some comments last week at our council meeting about this, and my intention for bringing this forward was to protect taxpayer funds. And I feel that there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and we don't really know what the path forward was, and I'm not in agreement with the expenditure of any local funds at this point in time that we're not obligated to spend. And so I would like to look at every, aspect of this thing and really pause on this, on the expenditure of any of our funds. With that being said, there was information that came to me at the last minute that ultimately this for me is about what is best for the county as a whole. And based on that information, I do believe that the best thing at this point in time is to continue forward with working with the consultant for the FRDU. But I don't want that to change the conversation. I think that we should take a hard look at any other expenditures, and if they aren't absolutely necessary, that we should pause until there's more certainty about the future, because there are the concerns of the citizens are very valid. You said that yourself. And we have oak trees that have been removed. We have wetlands that have been filled in that otherwise would not have been allowed, or there would have been processes in place that would mitigate those changes, those losses. And the question is whether or not that will continue to move forward. I think that's what everybody's wanting to know. Is the operator correct in that he has exemptions to those laws, those ordinances and codes? And that is the certainty that I seek to understand prior to moving forward with anything that we are not contractually obligated to do. So at this point in time, my original intention was to ask for a pause on the $100,000 contract. Like I said, I've been given new information and I no longer support that, but would like us to look at all the smaller expenses and any other thing that we would contribute that's not contractually obligated in the future.
I'll just say two more things in answer to what Susan and Glenn just brought up. One, pause for how long? A year? 2 years? I mean, this may take a long time to resolve. And then what Councilor Young just brought up is the confusion. I tried to address that at the beginning. If PVJR was the consultant, yeah, pretty relevant. We've got a performance issue. Let's pause this new contract. They're not, nor are they the beneficiaries of this. This is for us, the council. It is our planning tool, some planning expertise that Oliver said they didn't have resident in their department. He asked for the consultant to get to this. So this is for our planning purposes. It has nothing to do with the particular issues with this operator. So Karen Bowerman and Michelle, what would you like to do?
At this point, I'd say to go ahead with a consultant and to evaluate what comes before us at the next step.
I concur with Counselor Bowerman.
Thank you. Kathleen, did you need anything else on 2.4? It looks like everything's status quo as of now.
Yeah, I think I've heard 4 counselors support moving forward as previously directed by council.
Okay, so 3.1, council retreat. Kathleen, were you going to speak to that?
Yes, so I just put together a draft agenda for the council retreat. And just most of it is similar to what you've seen in the past. There's a couple additions. So like the charter overview, OPMA, Ethics, Public Records Act, and Finance 101 and policy review, those are consistent that we do annually. I did add on here Board of Health, and this would be actually, you would convene as the Board of Health instead of the county council and discuss roles and responsibilities. I think it's a good discussion for council to have, for the community to hear that, especially when we're not in an emergency, a public health emergency, and also look at agendas for Board of Health. I know Public Health will have some suggestions on Board of Health or agendas and what they bring forward, but we certainly want to make sure the Board of Health is getting what you need on those agendas. Maybe it's including the Public Health Advisory Committee. So just to have that discussion at the retreat. And then on the second day, having our policy discussion that will be led by Jordan, and prioritization. The community planning annual work plan, this usually is adopted by council. I believe most of it for Oliver's group in 2024 is going to be the comp plan update, but of course the freight rail dependent use piece will be on there as well. So this is just to present that to council, get feedback, and hopefully adoption of that plan. And then the rules of procedure update that is required, I believe, under the charter. So open to any other additions, or if you want to remove anything. And the one ask I would have is if there's any dates between now and probably mid-February that absolutely will not work for you, if you can let Kristen know so we can solidify some dates for the retreat.
Kathleen, I'd like to see some limitations, excuse me, put on the open public comment relative to Board of Health. I do not want to sit there and listen to, I am a member of the Clark County and I want to be represented at the Board of Health meeting and you're not meeting and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to hear that. We've heard it again and again and again. This needs to be something different, and I'm not sure what for it to be productive, but if there are issues pertaining to Board of Health, that would be delightful. But let's be specific on what we want to hear, the topic area that we want to hear.
Yes, and thank you for that, Councilor Bowerman. And you'll notice on the first day earlier, I did not put public comment on there because that is just presentation. There's no direction given by council at that time, so there is no public comment. The Board of Health, it would be, and I'll work with legal just to make sure we're in compliance. But from my understanding, if council gives direction on the agendas, that would be something. That item specifically may be open to the open public comment because that's the item. Roles and responsibilities, I don't believe that there's going to be direction on that as well. So we can possibly reduce that to say it's open public comment regarding the agendas only and the structure of the agendas, because that's where we'll get direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Of course.
I just have one suggestion, and that's under the roles and responsibilities under the Board of Health. I think it'd be helpful if we have the Public Health Advisory Commission, you know, what their bylaws are, or explanation, and how that intersects with the Board of Health.
Absolutely.
Any other corrections, additions, suggestions? Okay, so we don't have a date yet until we kind of scrub everyone's availability. All right, and I did give some vacation days.
Chair, I have one more thought related to the rules of procedure. I wonder, just knowing how long it took us to get through that last year, if people have ideas or thoughts or recommendations, if we could provide input in advance, and those things can be kind of lumped together and get an idea in advance what might be on people's minds.
So just what brought us on this item today on the FRDU, I saw two things, and one was counselor reports. You know, there's kind of custom, but I didn't see any definition within our procedural rules of what constitute counselor reports. I mean, normally it's you go to a committee meeting and you come back and you report back on it, or if you had a meeting with a mayor or another city councilor, some significant meeting with a nonprofit, that you would then come back and say, hey, I had this discussion. So that was something that came up out of this, that I thought councilor reports should be defined as to what the scope is. And then the other issue is, you know, what constitutes abuse of reconsideration. You know, I was kind of disturbed. We don't have Leslie on, do we? She is? Okay, so a couple of years ago, we basically, and it was a different PA, basically said, you can't reconsider something unless you're in the majority vote. And no matter how you string this out, this instance today was kind of a motion to reconsider by a minority vote. Yet I didn't see that in the analysis. I saw an opposite outcome. So I was concerned about that, and I would like to address that. Basically, it's a Robert Rules issue, whether we need to define it better in our own rules. And so we'll see what councilors have to say about that.
Chair
I don't have anything else. Please.
Thank you. This is Leslie Lopez. I just wanted to address what you just stated. In this particular situation for today, my understanding it was a different action that would be taking place, not a reconsideration, but making a pause. The reconsideration that happened before, those reconsiderations, my understanding is they need to happen during the same meeting. So that's a different process. Certainly we can add some of that information for Robert's rules into the rules of procedure. I think we did discuss that last year, and then the majority of the council decided to keep it more vague, but certainly willing to look at that to discuss for this year.
Yeah, so we'll need to look at that, because that's just basically how you've characterized the issue. So essentially you open up, you can amend anything. You may not be reconsidering it, so maybe that's the second part of the question on how we address, because it does take away from votes. It doesn't respect the votes. So you can, with your logic, you could basically have a different motion. It's not for reconsideration, as long as you're amending or suspending a decision that you previously made. I would disagree with that. So anyway, any other rules that
just
one
thing
be contemplating?
And Chair Mevigi, and I know this was suggested, I have also been keeping some notes over the years, over the last year, from what council has said maybe works or doesn't work. And I agree, if you can send those ahead of time, that would be great. And I would recommend sending it individually to me, so that way we're not inadvertently having a discussion over email. And then at the end, after I collect everything, I will send it all to the council so that you can see some of the topics that council would like to talk about.
Thank you. Glenn, you had another.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that. I think I'm happy to have a conversation on this whole thing, but I would urge caution on any kind of restrictions for us to review an issue that we may have made a decision. I don't know if you remember, but I was an affirmative vote originally on this issue, this particular issue. But in the light of new information coming forward, I think there should be some form of a mechanism where we as a council can look at something and make sure that we're not moving forward blindly on something just because it's something that was decided in the past at some material point in time. Thank you.
Understood. Good point.
Is
Oh,
in
someone else, was that?
so that is accommodated. There is another area that, man, talk about sensitive, that I really feel pretty strongly about. I think there are some of us counselors who talk too much at meetings, and that we tend to monopolize the discussion and just go on and on when it's not necessary. And I don't know how you would like to address that, if at all. Maybe by total time, maybe not at all. But I just think that it's something that needs some attention, because otherwise there are some of us who really do talk too much. And then there's another thing, and that is, how much time are we demanding of staff? How much time are we demanding that you produce X, Y, or Z for us? And I think that that needs to have some kind of a limit drawn on it too. Obviously, it's important that staff be responsive and so on, but not to the end where it is all that they can do during the day. So it's something that I think should be addressed, and how it can be addressed, again, could be by time. It could be by numbers of points of contact. We could decide, or it could be not at all, obviously.
Okay, thank you. And anyone else? Michelle, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't, Chair.
Okay, are we ready then to move on to the work session request?
Do you think you have council reports before that? Would you like to do that first, or?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did skip that. Counselor reports.
I actually have a brief report. I had the opportunity to meet with the school superintendents for all of the districts. They have monthly meetings that I discovered. I was interested in learning more about the impacts of homeless students in each of the districts that have just absolutely are on the rise. It was really they were very open. I invited Council for the Homeless to join me. It was good give and take. I think we've opened some doors of communication. There are some impacts, I think, that aren't fully being, well, I know there's impacts that aren't fully being covered by the district. So they're struggling, and I hope that we can move forward in finding some solutions to that. And I only had 5 minutes, but talked about the update of the comprehensive plan, encouraging them to get involved. And there was some interest there, but it's such a big, sprawling topic. I think it was difficult for them to try to figure out how to interact with that process. So I'm hopeful I can have a conversation with Oliver to help figure that out.
Super. It sounds like you have an agenda item already for ECHO. Glenn?
Yes, last night I was able to attend our county does a community needs assessment survey once every 3 years. And yesterday, county staff held a forum and a walk-by, I think is what they call it, with the raw data that they've received from those surveys. And we're seeking some initial input, and there's multiple meetings coming up in the future. I encourage you to attend. But the biggest takeaway, and I wanted to thank staff for doing a great job with that, but the biggest single takeaway that I took from that was that overwhelmingly the answer was the same to every question on every subject for what are the biggest barriers to receiving the services that you need. And that answer was right around 70% of people every time they don't know where to go for services. So we have some real work to do to get the word out. And I don't know how that is, but we need to spend some time and effort to figure out how to connect people to the services that they so much need in the community. But I do want to thank staff again for doing a great job of presenting that. And the interesting thing was, it was at the Vancouver Downtown Library. And as we know, there is a higher concentration of homeless in that area, and so we had the opportunity to have an individual that was experiencing homelessness sit at our table and express how this stuff related to her, and her challenges that she's gone through to find and receive services, or some services that she still has not been able to find or receive. So very interesting. I encourage, there's I think 3 or 4 more of them throughout the county. I encourage any counselor to attend those. They're well worth it.
Other reports? I would just very briefly say Michelle and I were on CTRAN last night. It was my very first meeting. I haven't really paid much attention with all the other committee assignments I've had over the years. And I will only mention one thing from that meeting. One, they once again won great awards, nationally awards. Sean Donnelly is leaving. He's going to San Diego. He will be gone in March. So we formed a subcommittee last night just to really to decide how to move forward. Do we stay internal and just elevate someone from staff? I mean, it is an organization that just keeps winning awards and is doing great. So he's got a great deputy chief of staff. So the subcommittee will look at that issue, or whether to go out and hire a consultant to hire somebody to find someone to replace him. So that's moving fast. He'll only be around for a few more months, and he has led a great award-winning organization. So Michelle, did you want to add to that?
No, not just that he will be missed. I've been really impressed with him since I've been on the CTRAN committee, and I didn't know that much actually about CTRAN. So he's just been a pleasure to work with, and he's so responsive whenever I've asked him for information. He will be very, very, very missed for sure. And just my counselor report, I just wanted to briefly touch on attending the Southwest Regional Academy ribbon cutting. It was very exciting, and it's going to do, I think, just a lot of great things for our community and really bolster our law enforcement to just make them a stronger force and help with recruiting and retention needs. It's very, very exciting, and it was a pleasure to attend that last Friday.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I think we were all there, and it was exciting. And from the governor on down, everybody was very engaged. And it's one of those rare things where government really is working well. And there were I haven't ever heard from any quarter any opposition. Everyone just started rowing in the same direction, and it happened very quickly. Yeah, it's very exciting. The facility looks great, as temporary as it may be. But thanks for mentioning that. Any other council reports? Otherwise, we'll go right to this work session request. Okay, Kathleen, I think you're back on. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So Public Health is asking for a 30-minute work session regarding our Code 2417, which is the on-site sewage systems rules and regulations. They are looking at simplifying the language that will simplify the permitting process and potentially saving some of the applicants some cost. So they're wanting to present this information to council prior to it going to a hearing.
Yep, that's good.
So, any comments, objections? Otherwise, we'll schedule it. We've got multiple thumbs up. I think we're ready to go. Okay, so we'll move on to policy updates.
Hey, Council. Jordan Bogey for the record. Sorry for that. I've got 4 items for you today. I'm going to go from shortest to longest here. So the first thing is a request from our lobbyists and WASAC's Legislative Steering Committee. They've requested if anyone is available to attend any of the meetings of the LSC in person in Olympia this session, they would really welcome that. I know that Councilor Belcott is our main counselor on there, and I think Young is the alternate, so you two would be first teed up, but my understanding is that they would welcome anyone who wanted to come in person. I think part of what they do sometimes is after those meetings, they go and meet with different representatives and senators, and so always great to have folks in person. So just wanted to pass that request along to council. The second item I have for you today is a request to get a thumbs up. So there is a bill, I'm not sure if it dropped today or maybe it will be dropping in the next day or two, regarding a 6-month extension for cities and counties in this comprehensive planning cycle. And so our community planning, I've had conversations with Oliver and Kathleen. They're ready to finish the comprehensive plan on the timeline that currently is constructed. But I've heard from City of Vancouver, and my understanding is some of the other cities who are planning within the county, particularly the greenhouse gas emissions, climate piece, and some of the housing pieces, they are worried about being able to finish this on time. So there's a request for us to have our lobbyists sign in support of this bill that would allow for, well, it would mandate a 6-month extension because everyone is planning on the same cycle. So all of the counties and cities who currently would be finishing in June of 2025 now would have a deadline of December 2025. And so just a request to see if we have thumbs up from council to support that when that bill comes up.
I don't see any harm. I don't see that we're going to piss somebody else off that's opposing it. I would sign on.
My guess is we'll need the time unless Oliver has some objection since he's moving forward with the original timeline. It makes sense to me to have that option.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one comprehensive plan for the entire county. So if they need more time, they need more time. So yeah, I'd support that.
I would support that as well. I think I saw a thumbs up from Councilor Bowerman.
Yep.
Super, thank you.
Perfect.
What was the bill number?
I believe it's going to be H Bill 2490, but what I saw was preliminary, so I'm not sure if that's the actual one that drops, but I can forward that to you when I see the actual bill. So that was number 2. Number 3 is just wanted to let you know I have a request out to the VHA and to Recovery Hotel to make sure that they're able to join us again, but planning for the 23rd to come back to council for the request to spend the 1406 funds for affordable housing that we heard on December 6th. And so what I had heard coming out of that conversation was to give Recovery Hotel the $130,000 that they had requested from the funds of the $800,000 that will be available this year from that fund, and then the remainder, $670,000, to the Vancouver Housing Authority for their Weaver Creek Commons project in Battleground. And so just want to let you know that I've asked them to make sure that they're available to answer any follow-up questions, but just planning to have that come before you again, and happy to chat more in the interim as well, or if there are any questions now, but just wanted to get that in front of you too.
Looks like no questions. Thank you for that.
Great. And then the final thing, so I sent this out as an email to councilors, but Representative McClintock's office has sent out a form that allows us to submit any transportation requests that we have. And so I talked to the chair about this, and I think I sent this out to council as well, but he had 3 requests that he would like to submit related to funds to support planning for a 3rd corridor, funding to support the replacement and renovation of the Camas Slough Bridge, and then a reinstatement of $30 million that was previously contemplated in a transportation bill that did not pass for supporting basically upgrades to the infrastructure related to rail development in the county. So working on the railroad there. So those were his 3 items that he had. I had a conversation with Councilor Marshall, who was interested in potentially some neighborhood transportation improvement program, as well as maybe reiterating as well the need for that Ridgefield Connector project that we submitted a letter in support of. And so I don't think today we need to go into the details and get thumbs up on each of those individual requests for me to submit. But if you have any other requests, I'd ask that you either send them to me or talk to me about them. And then next week on Wednesday, get a thumbs up on any of those individual requests so that I can submit them all to Representative McClintock's office and the Transportation Committee.
So I'd give you my thumbs up right away on the $5 million. I just completely forgot about that when I was just kind of off the cuff coming up with those priorities. So there must, once you get input from everybody, it'd be good to send it back out to everybody just to see if you have that. Well, actually, we can't do that. We have to bring it back here to have everyone pretty much vote on what that letter would be.
Yeah, so my thought process would be I will compile the full list of all the requests from all of the counselors and then go through each of them individually with the group as a whole to say the council as a group, we have 3 votes to support any of these, and all the ones that do have 3 counselors in support, I will submit a request for each of those that we have support for.
You're to do that in a session like this.
I would well, it needs to be next Wednesday to be in front of the next deadline. So.
Super. Okay, looks like everyone's good with that process.
Wonderful. Well, those are my 4 items for you today.
Thank you.
All right, so we have an executive session, 1 left. It's 7.2, collective bargaining. And that's all that needs to be stated. I don't have an RCW that I need to state, Leslie. We will be with council, I'm assuming, and it'll be for about 10 minutes. Let's give everyone.
Chair, just one quick thing before we move on. I was hoping that Jordan, during the conversation that we had with our state legislature, there was asked of us to come up with some problematic law, some things that they could change at the state level in terms of affordable housing. And I don't want that conversation to disappear. And so I'm hoping that Jordan can kind of latch onto that and work to make sure that we come up with some suggestions for that. Sorry to interrupt.
So, no, that's a good point. And I think you saw there was a response back from BIA, among others, that did list some of the high costs. Did you see that?
Yes, I believe so, because they had a list of different cost drivers related to housing costs. I believe that was national, though, right? Not a Washington State specific.
I thought it was Washington State specific because they were looking at some. Go ahead, Karen. I'm sorry.
Some of it was Washington State, but not local.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Thank you.
I'll make sure I'm looking at the right one there. And then also, to Councilor Young's point, there also is a bill that we did discuss. I know you weren't able to join us on the Monday legislative update, but there is a bill right now working its way through the legislature related to studying housing costs in Washington for the legislature and looking at what some of those drivers are and where there might be areas that changes could be made to reduce costs and increase affordability.
Jordan?
Super.
Just
So let's,
just a quick question. I
Go
believe
ahead.
that was related to permit costs in the state of Washington, wasn't it? Because you and I were on the same meeting.
The housing affordability bill?
Yes, or maybe it was a separate bill related to just studying permitting. I could be mistaken.
I'd have to double check because I believe the bill that we talked about on Monday with Josh Nanica was a little broader than that. So I think permitting is contemplated in that report that they'd be asking for as one of the drivers of costs. I mean, I think we know that that's true generally, that permitting costs obviously have a significant impact on housing. Hopefully this will lay out the scale of that. But if there's another bill specific to permitting, I'm not sure if, I think that might be a different one or one I haven't seen.
I think the one that we're talking about was sponsored by Representative Clicker, and it was considered yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. So there may be some outcome that we could find out on it now.
Wonderful.
So let's break from this session. Please take a rest break, and then we'll come back at 3:45, or yes, it is 3:45 after our executive session. Was there someone else that spoke up? Is that you, Lacey?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chairman Vijay. I just wanted, you had asked a question about what information you should state when we recess to executive session. And typically you would read the RCW that applies. Here, it's collective bargaining is an exception to executive, or it isn't through the RCW that it's part of executive session. So we typically, if it's collective bargaining, you just say that it's collective bargaining for our 10 minutes, it says. So I just wanted to clarify that.
So are we good to go? We'll take a quick break, and then we'll plan on being back here at 3:45.
Thank you.
Hello, the chair has asked us to extend executive session for 5 more minutes, and the council will now be reconvening at 3:50. Thank you. The council has extended executive session for 5 more minutes and will now be coming back at 3:55.
Okay, so we're back in session, having conducted our executive session. There's no further business to conduct. We are adjourned.